Welcome back to a study in the book of Genesis, and we're looking at Genesis 1 verse 6 through to verse 28, dealing with creation. Remember the Old Testament law, history, poetry, major prophets and minor prophets. Genesis 1 verse 6 says, "And God said, let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so." Before God created this expanse, the atmosphere, there was probably no free oxygen, and evaporation of the ocean's water was impossible. The water above the expanse was probably in the form of dense vapor canopy, not clouds. The whole earth was like a giant greenhouse. It is thought there was once a dense water vapor canopy surrounding the earth in the upper atmosphere until the flood. The whole earth would therefore have been a tropical climate. The frozen mammoths left vast gold beds all over the earth, even in Antarctica, etc., confirm this possibility. When the canopy fell out as the first rain and the great flood, the beginning of the great ice age, was the result. The mammoths were frozen instantly, some with fresh grass still between their teeth. An expanse is formed to separate the waters in the atmosphere. This expanse forms our blue sky. No need to see it as a solid dome. No need to have the waters above be outside our atmosphere. The order agrees with the scientific model as regarding outgassing. The word canopy has been used to describe what might have been the water above the firmament, the expanse. Water is a vapor, is a gas. It's invisible. The clouds we see are made up of tiny droplets of liquid water condensed in a solid particulate floating in the atmosphere. In order for water vapor to condense and form droplets of liquid water, a solid surface cooler than the vapor must be present. Solid particulates of dust or smoke floating in the air will work. Inside every drop of water or snowflake or hailstone that falls from the clouds is a tiny speck of particulate matter. Some creationist scientists think this is what God meant when he spoke to Job about the father or generator of the rain. Some of these same scientists believe that before the great flood of Noah, man had not seen rain. This is based on two scripture references. One says Noah was warned of things not yet seen, and Genesis says that instead of rain, a mist watered the earth. In Genesis 1:8, God called the expanse sky, and therefore was evening and there was morning, the second day. Other translations besides sky and heaven have firmament. According to Jewish cosmology, there were three heavens: the atmosphere, interplanetary and interstellar space. The heaven of heavens, also called the third heaven. The third day, Genesis 1:9, God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. God called the dry land earth, and the bodies of water seas. The earth was now prepared for plant life. There are two key events that take place on the third day. First, there is an appearance of dry land. Then there is the bringing forth of vegetation upon that dry land. In Jonah 1:9, when Jonah was questioned by the sailors aboard the storm-tossed sea, he describes the God whom he worships as the Lord God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. The Israelites in the wilderness, to whom Moses wrote this book, were well acquainted with this aspect of the identity of the Lord, for they had seen him make dry land from the bottom of the Red Sea. All continents were one continent at one time in Earth's history. God said, let the water beneath the sky be gathered into the ocean, so the dry land will emerge, and so it was. God named the dry land earth, and the water seas, and God was pleased. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas, and God saw that it was good. All continents were one continent at one time in Earth's history. The separating of the continents from one universal underwater landmass under the shallow ocean caused the land to be pushed up and the seas to run off into their basins. Job says, who shut up the sea behind doors where it burst forth from the womb, when I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness? God is here speaking to Job in poetic language about the birth of the oceans. The womb is apparently the earth, just as the scientific outgassing model suggests. The earth is then cloud covered and dark, suggesting, as in Genesis 1, the simultaneous formation of atmosphere and ocean. Let the waters beneath the sky be gathered in the ocean, so the dry land will emerge. We now know that Earth's surface is great thin plates of crust moving slowly on the mantle beneath. There are two types of crust: light, thick continent, heavy, thin ocean basin. It looks like the oceans drained off into basins when the crust was split into two kinds. Billions of years are unnecessary. There's no scientific evidence that this process should have required a long period of time if done by a supernatural force. In fact, the Himalayas show evidence of a sudden upthrust when the subcontinent of India crashed into the great Asian landmass. A huge chunk of the Earth may have been thrown into space from where the ground Pacific Basin now is to become the moon, the comets, or a planet. It all might have been done instantly. He said in 11, let the earth burst forth with every sort of grass and seed-bearing plant and fruit trees with seeds inside the fruit, so that these seeds will produce the kind of plants and fruits they came from. And so it was, and God was pleased. The earth produced vegetation, the various kinds of seed-bearing plants, fruit trees with seeds inside, each corresponding to its own species. God saw it was good. Evening came, and morning came, the third day. So we have the vegetation created on the third day. A command for the land to bring forth should not be interpreted to mean by some natural process of abiogenesis, whereby life creates itself from non-living matter. It's like Jesus commanding the winds and the waves of the sea of Galilee to be still. All nature instantly obeys the divine will when expressed in words. A bean seed. It's really super complex, but it carries the life in it of the future. Seed here should not be given any meaning other than reproductive genotype of a plant of any kind. The biblical kinds cannot be interbred or crossed. There's no evidence in the fossil record that any intermediate transitional types of plants or animals ever existed. Trilobites were always trilobites until they became extinct. There's a great variety among finches and dogs, but it will always be finches and dogs. You'll never get a finch turning into a dog or a dog turning into a finch. Macroevolution, the evolution of one species out of another species, and thus from one celled plant or animal to man through billions of transitional intermediates. Macroevolution refers to major evolutionary changes over time, the origin of new types of organisms from previously existing but different ancestral types. Example of this would be a fish descending from an invertebrate animal, or whales descending from a land mammal. Actually, they claim that whales are descended from elephants in evolutionary biology. There's much evidence from microevolution, many variations, but are all trilobites. Lots of different styles, lots of different types. Many variation of finches, but at the end of the day, they're still birds, they're still finches. They haven't turned into elephants or a lion. Microevolution refers to varieties within a given type. Change happens within a group, but the descendant is clearly of the same type as the ancestor. This might be better called variation or adaptation, but the changes are horizontal in effect, not vertical. Such changes might be accomplished by natural selection, in which a trait within the present variety is selected as the best for a given set of conditions, or accomplished by artificial selection. Man can play about with it, such as when dog breeders produce a new breed of dog. There's many variations, but they're all the canine family. From pugs to pitchers and spaniels to samoyeds, one artist has created a dog family tree that highlights the diversity of dogs and how breeds are interconnected. The study published in 2018, dogs and wolves evolved from a common ancestor. This is Dr. Nashi Ashanta. These animals, this is supposed to be a reproduction from one another, are seen to be an imaginary connection, changing all the time. Darwin's tree of life, which shows how species are related to evolution history, is wrong and needs to be replaced, according to leading scientists. There's many different trees of life now being developed, and every one of them contradicts a previous one. Whale evolution. For instance, modern whales are the descendants of four-legged land animals that are also ancestors of horses and cows. As you can see in figure 10.4, fossil intermediates between modern whales and a 60 million year old ancestor reveal a history of slow transformation, they claim. And these pictures are drawn by an artist. That's not what actually was being found. The central tenet of modern biology, that all species, including humans, evolved from one simple life form. That's in the year 2000. That was still being taught. It's no longer taught. It's actually been they're said to want to remove that picture out of the evolutionary canvas, if you will. In nature, we've never seen a single exception to the law of life produces life. To get a cow, you must first have a living thing, but that living thing can't be a horse, a donkey, or a whale. It must be a cow. To get an oak, you must have a living acorn. To get a lion, you must have a living lion. There's much evidence for microevolution, adaptations within a species that cannot be disputed. But macroevolution, the fantasy land of simple life forms evolving into higher and more complex life forms, is highly disputable and has no real evidential support. Most biology textbooks used in school used evidence from microevolution adaptations as proof of macroevolution. Every living thing was created first by miracle, full grown and able to reproduce after its kind. After the miracle, creation and reproduction followed according to God's natural law. Though begun by miracle, God's creation is sustained by constant natural laws. Every plant God created was able to reproduce after its kind. Naturally, there's no land vegetation without land to have it on. The order is interesting here. Plants are narrated before animals, which depend on them. Plants are narrated before sun, moon, and stars, seen as contradicting science. But something more subtle is going on here. Genesis, though often overlooked, this fits very well with the science model. Viewed from Earth, this describes the clearing of the atmosphere so that sun, moon, and stars become visible. This clearing is a direct result of vegetation which removes carbon dioxide and replaces it with oxygen. As God would have made all the vegetation full grown, he would also build in the effect of that. Just as we would if we asked to make a model railway of the 1950s, we would have the lights, the engines, and the dress of that time built in. God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light upon the earth, and it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to dominate the day, the lesser light to dominate the light. He also made the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light in the earth, to dominate the day and night and separate light from darkness. And God saw it was good, and it was evening, and it was morning, a fourth day. Genesis 14, let there be lights. We see this absolutely, totally amazing thing that takes place. This sky or expanse in which God formed the sun, the moon, and stars is the second heaven, or the heavens and the earth, of verse 1. Without the light of the sun, there would be certainly no natural separation of day and night. God had already brought light into being on the first day, in 1:3, but we are given no explanation for the source of that light. Now we are told that God gave a permanent source of light in the form of two light bearers. Notice that these light bearers had several varied purposes. They were to divide day from night, for signs, for seasons, for days and years, to give light upon the earth. He made the stars also. God already brought light into being on the first day, but we are given no explanation for the source of that light. The Bible refers to several constellations of stars, such as the Orion and the Pleiades. There has always been controversy over the idea that God created the sun, moon, and stars on the fourth day. There are several possible explanations of this. We do not have room to give all of them here, or evidence in favour of each theory. The sun created on the fourth day. This is significant because Moses writes to Hebrews who had just recently come out of slavery in Egypt. The Egyptians had worshipped Ra, the sun god, as one of their chief deities. They need to know that God and Ra are not two different gods of a similar nature. Rather, it was Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, who had created the sun, the moon, and the stars. The mention of the stars at this point might be simply a part of a topical arrangement. One theory is that the sun was in position before the fourth day. The cloud cover, cleared by the impact of God creating the plants, took effect then. The sun and the moon's effect was seen more clearly. The mention of the stars at this point might simply be part of a topical arrangement. This is designed to have two effects: to show that there is nothing that was not created by God, and to prevent the Hebrews from following the heathen practices of astrology and star worship. The ancients used 12 zodiac constellations to chart the course of the seasons. I think there's more implied in that statement than the stars are for signs. Remember the special star of Bethlehem? Month comes from moon. The ancients marked off the months by the new moons. The new moon was celebrated by the Israelites according to God's law. The inanimate universe has been created. Light and light bearers are in place. The atmosphere and the water above it are there. The dry land and the seas have been separated. The plants have been created and now can provide food for the animals and the humans God is about to create. Now, God will create the animals and humans on days 5 and 6. And there was evening and there was morning, the 5th day. Did God make sea and mammals as well as fish and invertebrates on the 5th day? Did he also make flying reptiles, bats and insects? God's classification of the animals may not match the taxonomies of zoologists. The word translated bird in Hebrew means winged creature. Why God created sea creatures and birds on the 5th day and not on the 6th when he created all other animals is a mystery. But we'll look at some possible explanations. Let the water steam. Most evolutionists think animate life originated in the ocean. Well, it did, but it was not in the water or the chemical soup in the ocean that created these. It was God who created them. Paul said God called the light out of the darkness. God is not commanding the water to produce these creatures any more than he's saying the light shone out of the darkness, would mean the darkness created the light. The creative events of the 5th day correspond to that which took place on the 2nd day of creation. This is the first time that a command has been given to be fruitful and multiply. The command will be repeated in verse 28, where it shall be addressed to mankind. God's creation involves the intent to multiplication. From a single man and woman, he has brought forth all humanity. This multiplication is seen in the animal kingdom. It's seen among humanity. It's also seen in the spiritual realm. We are called to the same sort of multiplication ministry. Verse 24, God said, let the earth produce every kind of living creature in its own species, cattle, creeping things, wild animals of all kind. And so it was. And land animals were created next. Later God said, let the land produce living creatures. Does that mean the soil produced a tiny single-cell animal that Darwinianly evolved into the many kinds of animals we see today? Hardly. The material for the animals' bodies came from the land, ground and earth, whatever you choose to call it. But the land didn't spontaneously generate a living organism. Let the land produce. Dry land appears, verse 3. Land creatures created, day 6. The creative events of the 6th day correspond to that which took place on the 3rd day of creation. This time there is no specific reference to multiplication. Instead, the emphasis is upon each of the animals of the earth being after its own kind. God himself seems to make a distinction between the wild and domesticated animals from the very beginning, also the agricultural important plants. Verse 124-25, the creepers, the crawlers, the slitherers, the reptiles, the amphibians, and some insects. We have similar expression, creeper crawlers. If it hops, jumps, crawls, creeps, walks, flies, swims, or slithers, God made its ancestor on the 5th or the 6th day. Verse 26, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. Let us make man in our image. When God the Father said, let us make man, he was speaking to the other two personalities of the Godhead, Christ, whom we know as the Son, or the Word, and the Holy Spirit, who are coexisting with him from eternity. Make in our image is not referring to physical look of man, but the character and personality, the ability to love, to have compassion, etc. God is spirit, and we have a spiritual aspect as to who we are. God made man ruler over his creation when he said, let them have dominion over the sea, over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth. We are to be good stewards of God's creation. We're probably just learning that today, just now in our generation. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. Last but not least, God makes the crowning achievement of his creative process. man. The fleshly body man is only a temporary house. At first Adam was the only human being, but God said, it's not good for the man should be alone. I will make him a help meet for him. Therefore God made Eve a wife, a companion for Adam. Adam said, this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother and shall cleave unto his wife, that the two shall become one flesh. Later, Jesus taught that this original marriage and home is God's ideal. In the image of God, in what way was man created in the image and likeness of God? Some have suggested that it's in the area of free will. Others have tried to see in this statement a triunity within man, that his body, soul and spirit are a reflection of the triune God. Still another view put forward the idea that they think that God has a body, but none of these views is supported by the context of Genesis. In the image of God, federal headship, stewardship and care for the environment. The context suggests the area of rulership, and this is seen in verse 28. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. As God is sovereign over all that he created, so now man is placed in a position of relative sovereignty and responsibility and rulership over all that was upon the face of the earth. There's a sense in which he is to be God's representative on the planet. This is what it means for man to have been created in the image of God. He is in God's place, the place of rulership with respect to the rest of life on this planet. Mankind was given the position of federal headship over the earth. The earth was to be over his stewardship. It is because of this that man's fall was able to impact all the rest of the creation. When man fell in sin, the rest of creation was affected because it was under man's dominion. If mankind had been given the position of stewardship over the rest of creation, then it stands to reason that the Christian has an obligation towards the faithful stewardship of that with which he has been entrusted. The Christian has a basis for ecology that goes far beyond the pragmatic. He has been entrusted with the care of God's creation. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over it, over the birds of the sky, over every living creature that moves upon the earth. First man had to learn to multiply before he could divide at the Tower of Babylon. That's the normal progression, isn't it? First you multiply, then you divide. Think, if a man had been on this earth as long as the long ages evolutionists say, there would by now be a person standing over every square meter of land. Multiply and fill the earth. Look, I have given you the seed-bearing plants throughout the earth and all the fruit trees for your food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that was the breath of life, in it I gave every green plant for food. And it was so. All animals, including man, were vegans until after the Great Flood. This passage specifically mentions plants as having been given for food for both mankind and the animal kingdom. Some have taken this passage to mean that only plants were originally to be utilized as food, and that this didn't change as a creation ordinance until Genesis 9:3, where God says, every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant. Vegetarians or vegans? Vegetarians eat eggs and dairy products, but vegans eat no animal products at all. God said the animals and man may eat vegetables and fruits, but it has said nothing about milk, cheese or eggs. So it's possible animals and man were true vegans until after the Great Flood. I don't think man's digestive tract changed after the flood, so it seems that man can thrive strictly on plants and plant products. God saw all that he made and was very good, and it was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. God had been saying that everything was good up until the time he created man. After he created man and woman, then he said everything was very good. The sixth day concludes not merely with the declaration of goodness, but with the statement is very good. This is going to stand in contrast to the events that shall take place in Genesis chapter 3. The purpose of the creation account? We must remember that the creation account doesn't stand alone. It's part of the larger book of Genesis, which in itself is a part of the larger work of the Torah or the law. Therefore, the purpose of this account must be seen in terms of the covenant people of Israel who had come out of Egypt. They were to know that their God was no mere tribal God. He is the creator of all the universe. Conclusion. Now God has finished creation. He will never create another new kind of physical thing. In his infinite wisdom, he has made an entire universe in just 6 days. He's made all forms of living things within the same kinds we see on Earth today. Many have become extinct, but none have evolved into kinds other than those created. Genesis 1 and the origin of the earth. A reasonable interpretation of biblical and scientific data is consistent in a striking, non-trivial way. The correlation between Genesis 1 and science is much better than between Genesis and other ancient creation accounts. I believe this is so because the Creator is the author of Genesis. Some lessons. This world belongs to God, not to us. It is our Father's world. We have been merely made stewards of this world, and that means we have an obligation to take care of his world. Christians ought to be ecologically minded, for we realize to us has been committed the stewardship of taking care of God's world. There's only one God, and that is the God who created us. No matter what we may hear or read in the newspapers, we did not create God. That means he is the God of every man, even if every man does not recognize him as such. The God who created us has also remained committed to us, even when we refuse to be committed to him. He has not left his creation to run by itself, but has continued to be part of it. The God who created us desires that his creation be obedient to him. He is the one who has created the order and the rules. We are the ones who prefer to make up our own. The God who created us is a pretty big God. He is the God of all of the heavens and the earth. He is sovereign and no one can tell him what to do. When I look up at the night skies and see the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars you have made, I cannot understand how you can bother with mere puny man to pay any attention to him. Psalm 8, 3 and 4. May the Lord be with you. It shouldn't surprise us when the God of the universe can't fit between our two eardrums. If you've got anything out of this lesson, please feel free to come back and join us again as we look at Genesis 1:29, creation,